On the 27th of January 1302, the government of Florence found the city's greatest writer, Dante Alighieri, guilty of charges of embezzling money while in public office. Although he was only sentenced to 2 years in exile, he never returned to his homeland. Instead, he composed his greatest work, the Divine Comedy. Was Dante's book on the journey through hell and purgatory to heaven a reflection on his own spiritual crisis over his exile from his homeland? And how did his famous work bridge the span between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance? This is the story of Dante Alighieri, the poet who mapped heaven and hell. The man known to history as Dante Alighieri was born in Florence in present-day Italy. His precise date of birth is unknown, but the autobiographical allusions he made in his famous literary masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, indicate that he was born around May 1265. He was given the name Durante at birth, possibly after his maternal grandfather, but he was always known as Dante. His father was Alighiero di Bellincione. He was a Florentine businessman and moneylender who was in his 40s or 50s by the time of Dante's birth. The Alighieri family were from a modest background, although were moving up in Florentine society. Dante claimed that his great-great-great-grandfather, a man named Cacciaguida, was a warrior in the 12th century who was knighted by Holy Roman Emperor Conrad III during the Second Crusade, where he was killed in battle. Cacciaguida is supposed to have married a woman named Alighieri from the Po Valley, from which the family took its name. Little is known about Dante's mother Bella, who married Alighiero in 1262, but circumstantial evidence suggests that she hailed from the wealthy Abbati family. She died a few years after her son's birth, and in 1270 or 1271, Alighiero married his second wife, Lapa Cialuffi, with whom he had a son named Francesco. Dante is known to have had a sister named Gaetana, and according to the life of Dante Alighieri by the 14th century Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, he had another sister who was the mother of Boccaccio's friend Andrea Poggi. Scholars are divided on whether these daughters were the product of Alighiero's first or second marriage. Dante's family lived in a modest house on what is now Via Dante Alighieri in the district of San Pier Maggiore. Today, the site hosts a small museum dedicated to the writer, though the building has changed considerably over the centuries. At the time of Dante's birth, Florence was a city of some 40 to 50,000 inhabitants, which made it one of the largest in Europe at the time. However, its iconic buildings, such as the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, the Palazzo Vecchio, and the Church of Santa Croce, only began to take shape at the end of the 13th century. Many of them were not completed for decades and sometimes centuries. These iconic architectural monuments, which would become symbols of the Italian Renaissance, were financed by the increasing wealth that was flowing into the city. Florentine bankers and merchants operated international networks spanning much of Europe from England to Sicily, lending money to kings and aristocrats to finance military campaigns and other expenditures. The city's currency, a gold coin known as the florin, was the preferred means of international trade for the continent. Such was the esteem in which Florence's merchants and moneylenders were held around Europe. Dante's Italy was a nation of independent city-states. In theory, Italy had a king who claimed the legacy of Charlemagne, who, after conquering northern Italy in the late 8th century AD, was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in Rome on Christmas Day 800 AD. The southern half of the peninsula remained outside the Carolingian Empire, which was later divided into western and eastern realms that would become France and Germany, while local Italian rulers reasserted their independence. In the mid-10th century, King Otto I of Germany reconquered the Carolingian kingdom of Italy and followed Charlemagne's example by having himself crowned emperor by the Pope in 962. The realm that Otto founded is known to history as the Holy Roman Empire, but Otto and his successors ruled from Germany and only visited Italy for their imperial coronation. Accordingly, their prolonged absences from the peninsula enabled Italian city-states to act independently. The emperors periodically campaigned into Italy to reassert their authority, but any progress they made on the battlefield would be reversed once they returned to Germany. Although the emperor was crowned by the Pope, the turn of the 12th century witnessed a power struggle between the papacy and the emperors over the appointment of bishops. This was known as the Investiture Controversy. Although the Concordat of Worms in 1122 put an end to the controversy by recognizing the sitting pope's authority to appoint bishops, who were then required to also swear fealty to the emperor, the power struggle between pope and emperor continued in Italy throughout the High Middle Ages, with the pro-papal faction known as the Guelphs and the pro-imperial faction known as the Ghibellines. The conflict between the Guelphs and Ghibellines dominated Italian politics between the 12th and 14th centuries. Italian cities were split between Guelph and Ghibelline factions, which formed international alliances. The struggle for supremacy became especially acute in the early 13th century, after Frederick II of Swabia was crowned emperor in 1220. Frederick had been crowned King of Sicily at the age of 3 in 1198, following the death of his father, Emperor Henry VI. His realm included both the large Mediterranean island and the southern half of the Italian peninsula around Naples. The papacy was appalled by the prospect of Frederick uniting his Italian and Sicilian kingdoms, which would leave the papal state in central Italy completely surrounded. Florence was a long-standing papal ally and resisted imperial armies until January 1249, though the Guelphs were restored to power shortly after Frederick's death in December 1250. The Ghibellines took over a decade later, when Frederick's son, King Manfred of Sicily, defeated the Guelphs at the Battle of Monteperti on the 4th of September 1260. Dante's father, Alighieri, supported the Guelphs, but was not prominent enough to be among the thousands imprisoned or exiled by the new regime. In 1265, the year of Dante's birth, Pope Clement IV offered the Sicilian crown to Charles of Anjou, the brother of the King of France. Charles defeated and killed Manfred at the Battle of Benevento on the 26th of February 1266, and the Guelphs were restored to power in Florence in 1267. Henceforth, Florence would remain under the control of a Guelph government, closely allied to both the papacy and Angevin Naples. By the end of the 13th century, the Florentine Guelphs had split into the White Guelphs and Black Guelphs, headed by the Cerchi and Donati families respectively, which would have profound implications for Dante's life and career. Little is known about Dante's childhood and education, though he is likely to have started his studies in the early 1270s. The lessons were conducted in the Tuscan dialect of Italian, but Dante also possibly picked up some Latin at this early stage. Dante may have attended a Latin grammar school between the ages of 10 and 15. After leaving the grammar school, Dante is believed to have studied rhetoric and letter writing from Brunetto Latini, an eminent intellectual and statesman in the Florentine government, whom Dante describes as master in the Divine Comedy. Dante was also probably acquainted with Bono Giamboni, a judge who was known for adapting Latin texts into the Tuscan dialect of Italian. In his later writings, Dante often referred to suffering from illnesses involving his eyesight during his youth, and the 19th century Italian psychiatrist Cesare Lombroso speculated that he may have been epileptic. In his writings, Dante linked these bouts of illness with episodes of emotional distress. In 1274, he met Beatrice Portinari for the first time, who he later claimed was the love of his life and the inspiration for his poetry. Beatrice was the daughter of Folco Portinari, a prominent merchant banker who lived in Dante's neighborhood of San Per Maggiore. Folco held a number of public offices and founded the Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in 1286. His son, Manetto, would become one of Dante's best friends. Since unmarried women usually remained indoors, Dante did not meet Beatrice again until 1283, when she was married to Simone de' Bardi, a member of an even wealthier banking family who were best known for commissioning Giotto to paint their family chapel at the church of Santa Croce in the 1320s. Unlike the Portinari, who supported the White Guelphs, the Bardi lived in the district of Oltrarno, on the southern bank of the river Arno, and were closely associated with the Donati family, who led the Black Guelphs. A political marriage like this between opposing Guelph families was common practice in 13th century Florence to prevent the outbreak of armed conflict. Similar political considerations were behind Dante's own marriage, which was agreed by his family on the 9th of February 1277, a few months before his 12th birthday. His bride was Gemma Donati, a distant cousin of the Black Guelph leaders. Owing to the modest dowry of 200 small florins, equivalent to around 12 gold florins, some biographers have suggested that Gemma's branch of the family was not wealthy, though Barbero argues the low dowry was on account of the Alighieri family's modest status, since Gemma's father, Manetto, was a knight. The exact date of the marriage is not known, but it is believed to have taken place around 1283, when Dante was already the head of the household. Alternatively, it has been argued by some historians that Dante only married a decade later, in 1293, which is consistent with Boccaccio's assertion that Dante did not marry until after Beatrice Portinari's death. Dante's relationship with his wife remains a source of debate for scholars, since he never referred to Gemma in his writings. While Boccaccio claimed that Dante was trapped in an unhappy marriage and never saw his wife after being exiled from Florence in 1302, Dante's biographer Marco Santagata argues that there is not enough evidence to draw any firm conclusions about Gemma's whereabouts. The couple may have had up to 5 children, the eldest of whom was a son named Giovanni, who is referenced as the son of Dante Alighieri in a legal document dated 1308, before disappearing from the historical record. 2 other sons were named Pietro and Jacopo, as well as a daughter named Antonia. 14th century documents also mention a sister, Beatrice, at the monastery of Santa Stefano in Ravenna, who was a daughter of Dante. While most Dante scholars believe that Antonia joined a nunnery and took the name Beatrice as a homage to her father's beloved, Barbero argues that Beatrice was a completely different person. Dante's youth coincided with major changes in the Florentine government. In 1280, a peace agreement brokered by Cardinal Latino Malabranca, the nephew of Pope Nicholas III, enabled the return of the Ghibellines who had fled the city in 1267. While the Ghibellines were given various protections, the Guelphs continued to control the government. At the same time, the Florentine mercantile class, which was organized into 7 major guilds and many smaller ones, assumed greater political importance. In 1282, a government body known as the College of Priors was set up to represent the interests of the larger guilds, and in 1283 the number of priors increased from 3 to 6. This marked a transition of power from the old feudal nobility to the new financial class. While the Guelphs were in firm control of Florence, the Ghibellines were resurgent in the Tuscan city of Arezzo, while Pisa remained a Ghibelline stronghold that Florentine armies were desperate to break. While Dante was not involved in politics during the 1280s, he was more than an idle observer and served as a cavalryman in the Florentine army in the wars against Arezzo and Pisa. He may have seen military action as early as 1286, but it is certain that he fought at the Battle of Campaldino on the 11th of June 1289, where the Guelph army triumphed over the Ghibellines of Arezzo after the Black Guelph leader Corso Donati disobeyed orders to lead the decisive cavalry charge that broke the enemy lines. 2 months later, Dante accompanied the Guelph army as it besieged the fortress of Caprona near Pisa. After the small Ghibelline garrison surrendered, the Florentines marched on Pisa, but withdrew without besieging the city. Service in the cavalry was an expensive undertaking, but brought Dante social prestige. Unlike most of his fellow citizens, Dante had no profession yet, and instead relied on income from his assets like a minor aristocrat, as he and his half-brother Francesco probably owned several properties in Florence and the surrounding countryside. While Dante could live a relatively comfortable life, his close companions were far wealthier. His best friend, Guido Cavalcanti, came from one of the city's wealthiest and most powerful families, and other close friends like Manetto Portinari and Cino da Pistoia were also part of the financial elite. That Dante was treated as an equal by these men was due not to his birth or wealth, but to his literary genius. In Vita Nuova, published in 1294, Dante claimed to have been inspired by his second meeting with Beatrice Portinari in spring 1283. By now, the 17-year-old Beatrice was already married to Simone de' Bardi, and Dante saw her in the street accompanied by 2 older female relatives. Dante was surprised to hear her greet him, which he took as a sign of reciprocation. Dante returned home and had a dream about Beatrice, and after waking up, he anonymously wrote a sonnet which he sent to several poets, inviting them to interpret the dream. This type of composition was popular in Florentine literary circles and served as an intellectual challenge for poets. Among those who responded to Dante was Guido Cavalcanti, who soon became a literary mentor and friend. Dante and Cavalcanti were part of a movement which the former called the Dolce Stil Novo, or the New Sweet Style, a form of love poetry which took inspiration from the troubadours of southern France, as well as a Sicilian school that had developed around the court of Frederick II half a century earlier. One of Dante's sonnets offers a detailed description of the Garisenda Tower in Bologna, which remains a major architectural landmark of the city. The poem indicates that Dante visited Bologna in around 1286 or 1287, where he could have attended Latin literature lectures at the city's university, the oldest in the world. While he was already familiar with some political and philosophical works from his earlier studies, Dante would have had his first opportunity to read the great literary works by Virgil and Ovid. By 1290, Dante was in his mid-20s and already well known in Florentine literary circles as a poet who specialized in love poems dedicated to women. Dante's earlier poems in this genre were dedicated to other women, and it was only in the late 1280s that Beatrice assumed center stage. Beatrice's unexpected death on the 8th of June, 1290, was a great personal loss for Dante, but also paved his path to literary stardom by inspiring him to write the Vita Nuova, a book that combined his verses with semi-autobiographical prose commentaries to present Beatrice as the embodiment of courtly love. In Vita Nuova, Dante claimed that Beatrice's death left Florence almost like a widow, despoiled of all dignity. prompting him to write a letter of condolence in Latin. This letter was likely addressed to Cino de' Bardi, a cousin of Beatrice's husband, who was elected prior a week after her death. The letter appears to have established Dante's reputation as a Latin prose writer, while his canzone, Donne che avete intelletto d'amore, or Ladies who have intelligence of love, written soon after Beatrice's death, marked an important transition to what Dante described as his new rhymes style, a more popular form of poetry that made him a well-known cultural figure in Florence. While Dante's poetry was primarily intended to be recited, he was an accomplished musician who sometimes set his verses to music. His early 15th century biographer, Leonardo Bruni, also claimed that Dante was an artist, and Dante's writings do indicate that he was familiar with drawing and painting to some extent. During the early 1290s, Dante began studying philosophy. Dante may have been influenced by his friend Cavalcante, an atheist who sought to use logic to prove the non-existence of God, but he also mentions seeking comfort after Beatrice's death by reading the work of the ancient Roman orator Cicero and the late Roman philosopher Boethius, De Consolatione Philosophiae, the consolation of philosophy. As part of these studies, Dante attended lectures as a lay student at one or both of the city's leading theological schools, the Dominican institution at Santa Maria Novella or its Franciscan counterpart at Santa Croce, where he was introduced to Aristotle's Ethics. Dante attended debates among scholars at the Florentine monasteries and may have made a second trip to Bologna around 1292 and 1293, where he furthered his study by attending philosophy lectures at the university. Dante's study of philosophy informed the publication of Vita Nuova, a book that defies categorization. It recounts the history of Dante's love for Beatrice, which was almost non-existent on any practical level, but which was nevertheless important to Dante on a personal level. It also provided an outline of Dante's literary and intellectual development, as well as the history of poetry since Homer and Virgil. In all of this, it is important to remember that Dante was writing at the dawn of the Italian Renaissance and the humanist study that was resurrecting knowledge of the Greek and Roman classics of antiquity. Importantly, Dante praised the Tuscan dialect of Italian. He argued that the poetic art was no different whether the verses were in Italian or in Latin. He would build on these arguments during the early 1300s after he was exiled from Florence. Dante ended the Vita Nuova by declaring that he hoped to write about her what has never been written of any other woman. He hinted that the project was already underway, but his ambitions to write what may have been an epic poem about Beatrice were interrupted by his entry into Florentine politics. The executive government was in the hands of the 6 priors, also known as signori or lords, who were chosen from the membership of the major guilds and served 2-month terms before being replaced. Like most other Italian city-states, Florence had a podestà, or chief magistrate, with extensive executive and judicial power, who was a professional bureaucrat hired on an annual basis from outside the city. To check the power of the executive, the city government also included 5 councils, which collectively had 676 members, serving 6-month terms. The large turnover of office holders ensured that most Florentine professionals would hold some form of political office, and they would be expected to continue working while doing so. As we have seen, Dante had already served his city as a soldier in the late 1280s. Now his literary fame and social connections gave him opportunities to participate in a political life. In 1294, Count Charles Martel of Anjou, the son of King Charles II of Naples and a claimant to the Hungarian crown, visited Florence and was given a lavish reception by the city authorities. Dante could have been a member of a Florentine delegation responsible for entertaining the Count, since he would later describe Charles as a friend. Still, Dante was unable to make use of this royal connection in any meaningful way, as Charles died of plague the following year. Dante may also have joined a diplomatic mission to Rome in October 1294, after the accession of Pope Celestine V. During the 1290s, a bitter power struggle between the old nobility and the new mercantile class of Florence occurred. Dante's first recorded speech in the Florentine councils was on this issue. In 1293, the government issued the Ordinances of Justice, which excluded magnates from certain offices, including that of prior. 2 years later, on the 5th of July 1295, the magnates staged an armed demonstration in the city squares, demanding a reversal of the policy. The merchant class responded by mobilizing local militias to protect the priors. After tense negotiations, the magnates stood down. The next day, a compromise was agreed by which knights were still to be banned from becoming priors, but anyone else could become eligible for the office by joining a guild without a requirement to carry out the profession in question. The new reforms were voted on by the councils with large margins in favor. As a member of the 300-man General Council of the Republic, Dante spoke in support of the compromise, which was duly passed. By background and temperament, Dante was a political moderate, and while he had friends and relatives who were knights, his branch of the Alighieri family was undistinguished. Like other members of the moderate party, Dante was opposed to widespread political participation by the masses, but supported the rule of law and criticized the magnates who sought to overthrow the constitution by force. Dante's support for the popular government placed him at odds with his friend Guido Cavalcanti, a blue-blooded aristocrat. The reforms to the mechanisms of political office enabled Dante to hold higher office, since there were no longer restrictions on guild membership. Accordingly, he enrolled in the guild of physicians, apothecaries, and haberdashers. The choice of guild has confused some scholars, but this was a broad guild which accepted members who traded in all sorts of goods, and Dante's membership was not as surprising as it first appears. Membership of the guild entitled Dante to be appointed to the Special Council of the Captain of the People, a 36-member body where he served from the 1st of November 1295 to the 30th of April 1296. In mid-December 1295, he is known to have spoken in a debate at the Council of the Captaincies of the 12 major guilds, the body responsible for electing new priors. The procedure for the election was not fixed, and Dante was one of a group of so-called wise men who were chosen by the outgoing priors to participate in the selection process. This indicates that Dante was a trusted member of the moderate party who could be expected to follow the party line. Likewise, while Dante was serving as a member of the Council of the 100 on the 5th of June 1296, another branch of the Florentine Republican system, he spoke and voted in favor of all the proposals submitted by the Captain of the People. While Dante may have continued to hold political office in various capacities over the following years, nothing is known of his further political involvement until 1300. The intervening period witnessed increasing tensions between the Guelph factions in the city. Dante's sympathies lay with the White Guelphs, whose leading figures included his close friend Guido Cavalcanti. By 1299, the government was almost entirely in the hands of the White Guelphs, who enjoyed a broad spectrum of support that included the lower classes and the Ghibelline minority. The Black Guelphs found the dominance of their White Guelph rivals intolerable, and open conflict broke out in May 1300. While they were outnumbered in the city, they could count on support from Pope Boniface VIII, whose bankers were closely allied with the Donati. During this delicate moment, the Florentine government had to elect a new commander of the Guelph alliance in Tuscany. The Pope was requesting military support, and in May, Dante travelled to San Gimignano, inviting the town's leaders to a meeting of the allied cities. The The Pope hoped to reconcile the two Guelph factions in Tuscany and dispatched Cardinal Matteo d'Acquasparta to Florence to broker a peace. The cardinal's efforts led to the election of a new slate of priors with equal representation from the White and Black Guelphs to serve for 2 months from mid-June. Dante was among the priors chosen during the crisis. A few days after they took office, a group of magnates attacked the heads of the guilds during a ceremonial procession on the 23rd of June, the eve of the feast of St. John the Baptist, the city's patron saint. The priors were outraged and responded by exiling the leaders of both factions. The White Guelphs obliged, while the Donati threatened to lead an armed insurrection with support from the Guelphs of Lucca. The putsch was eventually abandoned after the Florentine authorities warned the Lucca government to withdraw their forces, and the Black Guelphs agreed to leave the city. Within days, the priors recalled the White Guelphs from exile, though Guido Cavalcante had fallen ill and died while returning to Florence. Dante's precise role in these key events is unknown, but the priors appear to have made their decisions unanimously. Dante later regretted his political involvement, and despite his efforts to appear neutral, he was widely regarded as a partisan of the White Guelphs. By the end of Dante's 2-month term as prior, the White Guelphs once again controlled the Florentine government. Cardinal d'Acquasparta, whom the Florentines identified as a sympathizer of the Black Guelphs, issued a papal interdict on Florence before leaving the city in September. Meanwhile, Corso Donati appeared in Rome to lobby for additional support from the Pope by warning that the White Guelphs would bring the anti-papal Ghibellines back into the government. In the meantime, Dante continued to serve what was becoming an increasingly unstable government. In April 1301, he was appointed as one of the wise men to elect 6 new priors. Later that month, he was given the responsibility of overseeing a major road-building project. On the 19th of June 1301, while serving on the Council of the 100, Dante spoke and voted against a request from the Pope for 100 Florentine cavalry to support his military campaigns. 3 months later, in mid-September, Dante participated in a meeting of all the city notables to discuss how to protect the constitution. Dante was recorded as being the first to speak, but his intervention went unreported. He continued to speak in council meetings throughout September, including one on the 28th, in which he agreed proposals to grant the priors widespread powers to appoint officials and to give the podestà extraordinary powers to judge acts of violence committed since mid-September, an indication that the government was facing widespread protests. The White Guelph government fell in November 1301 to an army led by Charles of Valois, the younger brother of King Philip IV of France, who responded to the appeals of the Black Guelphs to liberate Florence. Corso Donati returned in triumph, and the Black Guelphs proceeded to plunder the properties belonging to the White Guelphs, including Dante's. The Black Guelphs forced the incumbent government officials to resign, and the new regime launched legal proceedings against all the priors who had served since 1299. In January 1302, Dante was charged with embezzlement and sentenced in absentia to a large fine. His absence meant that he was condemned to perpetual exile with his property confiscated. This was the low point of Dante's life, one that threatened his financial and political future. Dante, who may have been serving as one of Florence's ambassadors to Rome at the time of the coup, was among over 600 White Guelphs who went into exile. His wife Gemma and his young children remained in the city, presumably protected by their Donati relations. Although Dante himself lost control of his Florentine assets, they were eventually restored to the family after his death. Dante would never return to his home city, but documentary evidence from June 1302 suggests that he was among the White Guelphs who allied with Ghibelline exiles to take back control of Florence. After losing their bases in the Arno Valley in the summer of 1302, the army of the exiles fled to Forlì and appointed the Ghibelline Scarpetta degli Ordelaffi as their commander. While this was not enough to turn around their military fortunes, in September 1303, French soldiers captured Pope Boniface VIII, who died in captivity the following month. In early 1304, the new pontiff, Benedict XI, hoped to broker a peace agreement in Florence and dispatched Cardinal Niccolò da Prato to accomplish the task. From Arezzo, Dante wrote a letter to the cardinal on behalf of the White Guelphs, asserting that they were true Florentine patriots who were fighting for the city's liberty. Cardinal da Prato received an enthusiastic welcome from the Florentine citizenry, who were keen to see the back of the Black Guelph regime. The cardinal re-established the government of the priors and invited both the White Guelph and Ghibelline exiles to return. Representatives from the various parties made a public show of reconciliation, but the peacemaking efforts were sabotaged by the Black Guelphs. Cardinal da Prato left Florence in June 1304 and excommunicated the city, after which the unpopularity of the Black Guelphs gave the exiles another chance to strike. With some 1,600 cavalry and 9,000 infantry, they marched on the city and attacked it on the 20th of July 1304. Ultimately, the assault failed in the face of a staunch defense by the garrison. According to Bruni, the failure of the exile army led Dante to break with the White Guelphs and abandon any thought of returning to Florence before being granted refuge to the northeast in Verona by the city's ruling family, the Della Scalas, who were affiliated with the Ghibellines. Dante himself claimed that he was already in Verona by the time the exile army abandoned its attack on Florence, labeling his former allies a wicked and foolish company. Dante had possibly been on a diplomatic mission to Verona on behalf of the White Guelphs as early as June 1303. While scholars have struggled to establish a coherent chronology for Dante's whereabouts during his exile, this was a productive period in his career as a writer. He did not stay in Verona for long. Boccaccio describes him as staying with various Italian lords in central Italy during this period. He appears to have returned to Bologna, where he may have sought a teaching position at the university. The city's academic resources would also have facilitated his work on his latest project, an ambitious philosophical treatise entitled Convivio, or The Banquet. Convivio was to be written in prose and verse, divided into 14 books, each of which would be introduced by a canzone. The project was never completed, and Dante only ended up writing 3 books and an introductory preface. It is worth remembering here that Renaissance books followed the ancient Greek and Roman practice of being equivalent to a modern-day chapter lengthwise. Written in Italian and addressed broadly to the Italian nobility, Dante set out a new political philosophy that marked his ideological transformation from Guelph to Ghibelline. After his exile, Dante recognized that the competition between Italian city-states brought disorder and chaos, and undermined the unity of Christendom across Europe. He argued that the papacy, instead of being a unifying force, had its own narrow political interests. The only alternative supranational institution was the empire, but while 3 men had been elected King of Germany during Dante's lifetime, none of them bothered to go to Italy to be crowned emperor. Dante consequently believed that it was up to the lords and powerful elites of Italy to promote peace and unity based on shared noble values. To achieve his lofty ambitions of unifying the Italian nobility, Dante had to contend with the linguistic diversity on the peninsula. Having spent much of his life in Florence, Dante was surprised by the differences in various Italian dialects and was astonished that different districts of Bologna even had distinctive dialects. Dante therefore set out to create a common Italian language out of the dozens of existing variants of Italian spoken across the peninsula and the plain of Lombardy, stripping out regional idiosyncrasies and establishing consistent grammatical rules. While he introduced the problem in Convivio, he discussed it in greater detail in another treatise entitled De Vulgari Eloquentia, or On the Eloquence of the Vernacular. Here Dante made a linguistic breakthrough by charting the historical evolution of languages, before embarking on a quest to establish a standard Italian vernacular. Such a language would be based on words that were universally shared amongst the various regional dialects of Italy. He then planned to discuss the use of the vernacular in different literary styles. Dante chose to write the text in Latin, a seemingly inconsistent decision explained by the fact that his intended audience was scholars who continued to favor Latin. In this endeavor, Dante secured the support of his friend Cino da Pistoia, who was not only a poet who also wrote in Italian, but a legal scholar closely associated with the University of Bologna. While the treatise was never completed, Dante would nevertheless succeed in transforming Italian into a literary language. Bologna, which had been ruled by an alliance of moderate Guelphs and Ghibellines, had been a secure place of refuge for Dante. All this changed in the early months of 1306, when the government there was overthrown by the Black Guelphs. With limited options to find a safe refuge for himself, Dante appears to have appealed to the government in Florence for a pardon. Once again, Cino da Pistoia, who was well connected to the Black Guelphs, may have been his intermediary. By October 1306, likely through Cino's efforts, Dante was a guest of the Malaspina family, who ruled over the Lunigiana region in northwestern Tuscany. Meanwhile, his application for a pardon appears to have been denied by the Florentine authorities. Based on the evidence of a canzone which Dante wrote late in 1306, in which he spoke of being separated from his wife and being unable to visit her, it seems evident that he was still continuing his efforts to return to his native city without much success. In 1307, he left the Lunigiana while continuing to stay with various lords affiliated with the Black Guelphs. Dante's hopes of an amnesty from Corso Donati were finally extinguished in October 1308, when his political rivals besieged him in his house and killed him after he attempted to escape. Dante is believed to have spent several months in Lucca until early 1309, when all Florentine exiles were expelled from the city. Dante's early biographers stated that he went to Paris around this time. There is really no evidence to support this theory, though modern scholars question whether he might have crossed the Alps to Avignon, where the French Pope Clement V had moved the papal court. Dante may have attempted to appeal to the Pope to revive the peace process in Florence. In the meantime, Dante was continuing to work on his comedy, which Boccaccio later described as divine. According to a tale from Boccaccio's account, Dante had already begun work on his masterpiece while he was in Florence. When the Black Guelphs came to power, his wife Gemma had removed the manuscripts of his work to a monastery for safekeeping. Dante received them in 1306, while he was staying with the Malaspinas. Most scholars reject this notion that Dante began writing the comedy in Florence, though he may have conceived of the project in some form before his exile. The epic poem is divided into 3 sections and narrates Dante's journey through the realms of Hell, Purgatory, and Paradise in spring 1300, when Dante was 35 years old. He is guided through Hell and Purgatory by the Roman poet Virgil, before his beloved Beatrice meets him in the Garden of Eden and leads him through most of Paradise, while Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, a leading church figure of the 12th century, appears as a final guide at the end of the poem. Each of the 3 realms further divided into 9. The 9 circles of hell with the devil are at the bottom, Then the 9 rings of Mount Purgatory are in the middle, and the Garden of Eden is at the top. There are 9 celestial bodies in paradise, followed by the Empyrean heaven, which takes the form of a rose symbolizing divine love, with God at its center. Like most of his other writings, the comedy serves multiple purposes. It is not only a discussion of Christian morality and human destinies, but also a commentary on contemporary Italian affairs with a heavy autobiographical element. The individuals that Dante encounters during his journey offer prophetic statements about the future of Florence and Italy that would already have taken place at the time of writing. Dante likely wrote Inferno between 1306 and 1309, while Purgatorio and Paradiso each took him around 6 years, with the whole book completed shortly before his death in 1321. The evolution of Dante's political positions during this 15-year period is reflected in the poem itself. Dante's Inferno, the most famous part of the Divine Comedy, describes the descent into hell. Dante invents the concept of limbo, the first circle for non-Christians who lived virtuous lives. The inhabitants include a host of historical figures from classical antiquity, including Virgil himself, as well as fellow poets Homer, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan. Dante also sees Roman statesmen here such as Caesar and Cicero, and Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In Circle 2, reserved for individuals who succumbed to lust, Dante met Achilles, Paris, and Helen from the Trojan War, as well as the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. The most poignant encounter is with Francesca da Rimini, an Italian noblewoman married to Giovanni Malatesta, who had a famous affair with Giovanni's brother Paolo in the 1280s. In around 1283, Giovanni discovered the lovers and brutally murdered them in bed. Dante's sympathetic portrayal of Francesca inspired dozens of plays and operas on the subject. The murder took place at around the time Dante began writing poetry, and not long after Paolo Malatesta served as captain of the people in Florence. As Dante was seeking a reconciliation with the Black Guelphs while writing the Inferno, he stresses his affiliation with the Guelphs. After making his way through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th circles correlating with the sins of gluttony, greed, and wrath, Dante encounters heretics in the 6th circle of hell. Among these, he meets Farinata degli Uberti, the 13th century leader of the Florentine Ghibellines. The identification of the Ghibellines as heretics was in line with papal policy, and a tense political debate between Dante and Farinata in this section of the Divine Comedy reflects Dante's desire to dissociate himself from the Ghibellines. Dante also signals a break from the white Guelphs by placing Cavalcante the Cavalcanti, the father of his friend Guido, alongside Farinata. Dante also places Emperor Frederick II among the heretics, even though he had praised Frederick and his son Manfred in Convivio and De Vulgari Eloquentia. Throughout these sections, Dante presents himself as a representative of the moderate Guelph values, one who is trying to reconcile the opposing factions. By the time Dante was writing Purgatorio, he appears to have given up on any hope of returning to his native Florence. This enabled him to express his genuine pro-imperial views in line with his recent treatises. While Dante had placed Frederick II among the heretics in hell, he encounters his son, King Manfred of Sicily, among the excommunicates before purgatory, and describes him as handsome and of noble aspect. He reverses his judgment on other Ghibellines by praising the figure of Buonconte da Montefeltro, whose father Guido he had encountered among the fraudsters of the 8th circle of hell. Buonconte had fallen in battle while fighting for the Ghibellines at the Battle of Campaldino. Even after he abandoned his attempts at reconciliation with Florence, Dante portrayed the Malaspina family positively in Purgatorio, while placing the family's enemies in hell. While Dante was writing Inferno, he had been appealing to Corso Donati for amnesty and avoided mentioning the Donati family. But by the time of Purgatorio, Corso was dead. While Dante could not avoid making a reference to Corso being condemned to hell, he meets his brother Forese Donati in Purgatory and describes him as an old friend. Dante also shows favour to the family by placing their sister Picarda in paradise. In Purgatorio, Dante lamented the political situation in Italy and the weakness of the empire. On the 1st of May 1308, the King of Germany, Albert of Habsburg, had been assassinated. By the end of the year, the German princes elected Count Henry of Luxembourg to succeed him as King Henry VII. Dante was indifferent to the news of Henry's coronation as king in January 1309, since he did not expect him to be interested in Italian affairs. Things began to change when Pope Clement V recognized Henry's election as king in July 1309, prompting rumors that Henry planned to be crowned emperor in Rome. Before he could contemplate such a venture, Henry had to consolidate his power in Germany, and he did so by making an agreement with the Habsburgs and installing his son John as King of Bohemia. In the spring of 1310, he began sending ambassadors to Italy, proclaiming his desire to restore peace to the peninsula, while Florence responded by rallying Guelph opposition to the imperial project. Dante welcomed Henry's intervention. The 15th century historian Flavio Biondo claimed that in July 1310, Dante wrote a letter from Forlì to Can Grande della Scala of Verona on behalf of the White Guelphs, denouncing the folly of the Florentines. A few months later, Dante wrote a manifesto addressed to all the Italian lords, urging reconciliation in line with papal and imperial policy. Henry crossed the Alps in Piedmont in late 1310 and was crowned King of Italy in Milan in January 1311, where a large body of Guelph and Ghibelline lords gathered to pay homage. However, the king soon faced a series of rebellions in Lombardy, which he put down with increasing severity. In late March, Dante wrote a letter addressed to the Florentine government urging the Black Guelphs to submit to the emperor. 2 weeks later, he wrote to Henry advising him to ignore the disturbances in Lombardy and strike directly at Florence. Henry waited until October to leave for Genoa, wintering there before sailing for Ghibelline Pisa in February 1312. References to Dante being in Genoa and Pisa at this time indicate that he was part of Henry's entourage. Dante's involvement with Henry's imperial project led him to write his treatise De Monarchia, which considered the merits of monarchical government and discussed the relationship between the emperor and the pope. Dante argued that both the pope and the emperor received their authority directly from God and were of equal rank. While the pope had supreme power on spiritual matters, the emperor held supreme power on earthly matters and could not be challenged by the church. However, Dante's hopes that Henry would bring peace and unity to Italy would be crushed. Henry left Pisa in late April 1312 and arrived at the gates of Rome on the 6th of May. Half of the city, including St. Peter's Basilica, was then controlled by the Orsini family, allies of Robert of Anjou, King of Naples. Robert had kept his cards close to his chest, but was now openly siding with the anti-imperial coalition. Meanwhile, under pressure from the King of France, Pope Clement refused to order the Angevins to withdraw and warned Henry against attacking them. On the 26th, the imperial troops attacked the Angevins and were repulsed, forcing Henry to hold his coronation at the Basilica of St. John Lateran, where he was anointed by 3 cardinals sent by the Pope. The emperor then marched on Florence, but had too few men to besiege the city effectively and abandoned the attempt in October. Imperial fortunes appeared to improve at the beginning of August 1313, when Henry and his ally King Frederick III of Aragon, the ruler of Sicily, launched a joint invasion of Angevin Naples, However, Henry fell ill and died on the 24th of August, leaving the Ghibelline cause in ruins in Italy. Dante's movements after the death of the emperor are poorly documented, but some scholars argue that he was in western Tuscany, either in Pisa or at the Malaspina castles in the Lunigiana. After learning of Pope Clement V's death in April 1314, Dante wrote to the Italian cardinals urging them to vote for an Italian pope in the conclave, only for the proceedings to be suspended in July after the late pope's nephew used armed force to expel the Italian cardinals. Dante probably completed Purgatorio around this time, which ends with Dante climbing to the summit of Mount Purgatory, to the Garden of Eden, to meet Beatrice, who prophesies that the heir to the empire would free the church from its French captivity. This appears to be a reference to Henry VII's son, John of Bohemia, who was then fighting German rivals to succeed his father. By October, it was evident that John had failed, while his rivals, Frederick of Habsburg and Louis of Wittelsbach, were both elected as rival kings of Germany in opposition to each other. Despite Henry's demise, the Ghibellines continued to hold the initiative in Tuscany. Surrounded by enemies, in May 1315, the Florentine government allowed exiles to return in exchange for a fine and a demonstration of penitence at the baptistry of San Giovanni. In a letter to a friend in Florence, Dante refused to subject himself to such humiliation when he was a famous poet and intellectual. This fame appears to have been based on the publication of Inferno and possibly Purgatorio a few months earlier, which generated an immediate reaction. A few months later, the Ghibelline commander, Uguccione della Fagiuola, inflicted a heavy defeat on the Florentine and Angevin forces at the Battle of Montecatini in August 1315. To Dante's disappointment, the Black Guelph regime survived and reissued a death sentence against him and his sons, while Uguccione lost power in western Tuscany and was forced to take refuge in Verona in 1316. Dante may have accompanied Uguccione to Verona, then ruled by Cangrande della Scala. Dante had been acquainted with Cangrande's elder brother Bartolomeo during his earlier stay in Verona, and had corresponded with him as one of Henry VII's leading lieutenants in northern Italy. In a letter of dubious authenticity, which has been the subject of major scholarly debate and interpretation, Dante offered to dedicate to him Paradiso, the final part of his comedy. While Dante's unflattering portrayal of Cangrande's late brother, Albiono della Scala, would not have endeared him to the Lord of Verona, he was granted refuge in the city. Dante goes to great lengths to glorify Cangrande in Paradiso when he encounters his great-great-great-grandfather Cacciaguida on Mars. Although Cangrande was only a 9-year-old child in 1300, Dante's ancestor predicts that he would become a great warrior, and his magnificence and virtue would be known to both allies and enemies. Later in the poem, while on Jupiter, Dante launches into a scathing attack on Pope John XXII, whose election at Avignon in 1316 formalized the transfer of the papacy to southern France. Cangrande's opposition to John led the people to excommunicate him in April 1318. While Dante regarded Cangrande's excommunication as illegitimate, it may have caused religious services to be suspended in Verona. The 53-year-old Dante, who may have already been in poor health, decided to move to Ravenna, whose ruler Guido Novella da Polenta admired Dante's poetry. Although his host was a Guelph, by this point Dante was becoming disinterested in the political factionalism and was just grateful for the stability that Ravenna offered him. Dante lived in Ravenna with his reunited family. There, his eldest surviving son, Pietro, was granted 2 church offices to support the family's expenses. While he focused on completing his comedy, Dante also met and corresponded with an increasing circle of admirers. These included Giovanni del Virgilio, a Bolognese poet, who wrote to Dante in 1319, advising him to write Latin poetry inspired by Virgil's eclogues. Dante politely signaled his refusal by writing 2 of his own eclogues in Italian in line with his linguistic agenda. While Dante's eclogues would inspire Italian poets over the coming decades, he knew that his greatest legacy would be the Divine Comedy. In the final part of Paradiso, Dante made no further references to contemporary events, although he could not avoid denouncing Pope Boniface VIII via an exchange with St. Peter, the first Bishop of Rome, who laments the state of the Church. As Dante is led by Beatrice through the heavenly bodies in Paradiso, he makes increasingly confident predictions that God will restore order in Italy, but it is no longer clear how this would be achieved. Towards the end of the poem, Dante holds out hope that he would return to Florence in triumph and be celebrated for his literary accomplishments. Such hopes proved unrealistic, and in August 1321, shortly after completing Paradiso, Dante went to Venice to represent Ravenna on a diplomatic mission. Although the 2 cities would come to an agreement in October, Dante had fallen ill during the return journey and died on the night of the 13th of September 1321 at the age of 55. He was buried at the Basilica of San Francesco in Ravenna. As Dante's fame grew over the centuries, Ravenna denied several requests from Florence to transfer his body to his native city. An elaborate tomb built for him in 1829 in the Basilica of Santa Croce in Florence remains empty. Dante Alighieri is widely considered one of the greatest poets in European history. During his youth, he made his name writing love poetry, dedicated to Beatrice Portinari, a woman who he seemingly knew and loved from an early age, yet with whom he only ever had no more than a passing relationship in actuality. Although he was proficient in Latin, Dante was determined to promote Italian as a worthy literary language. Dante was a proud Florentine, who served his native city as a cavalryman and played an important part in city politics during his 30s. In doing so, he was caught up in the rivalry between the Black and White Guelphs in the city, and forced to spend the last 2 decades of his life in exile. This period witnessed an abrupt shift in Dante's political ideology, as he advocated for an Italy united by shared aristocratic values under the protection of the emperor. While Dante's Divine Comedy reflects the changing personal and political context in which he operated and is full of references to contemporary events, its underlying theological and philosophical themes have allowed it to become a timeless cornerstone of Western literature. Although Dante's political and literary ambitions were not realized during his lifetime, he was instrumental in the development of the Italian language. His writings not only stimulated the cultural flourishing of the Italian Renaissance, but inspired the cause of Italian unity, which was finally realized in the 19th century. The Italian language, which came into use across the peninsula as a result of unification, is resoundingly based on the Tuscan dialect which Dante did so much to promote the use of in the early 14th century. What do you think of Dante Alighieri? Was he a visionary poet who consciously laid the foundations of Italian nationhood, or was his work primarily shaped by his personal experiences during an age of political instability in Italy? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.